Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Crazy rumours emerging on exactly why Sergio Perez has retained his seat at Red Bull against all odds over the last couple of weeks. We would like to imagine that at the top level of Formula 1, the decisions, the governing is done with integrity in mind and with the absolute best interest of the sport at heart. But that may very well not be the case based on the evidence that we shall dive into over the coming minutes. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new. As always, plenty to go through today, such as a new team principal, of course, for Alpine. Oliver Oakes is taking over the role over there as the new team principal, former high-tech founder, high-tech team principal as well. The youngest team principal, by the way, in a rather long time. So Bruno Famin is out. He's taken over Oakes's next month and is trying to lead the Alpine team back to competitiveness. Whether that is basically an impossible task, it feels that way, frankly, but best of luck to the fella. And he is the youngest F1 team boss since Horner took hold of Red Bull back when he was 31 in 2005. Oakes is 36, but in Horner's tenure at Red Bull, these are the names that have led up the Alpine, Enstone, Renault, whatever you want to say. That's their team, and it's been a bit of a mess, as we full well know, over the last several decades at this point, frankly. Now, their driver for next year may very well be Jack Doohan. The rumour is that after, of course, Ocon is gone, they looked at getting Sainz, they couldn't get him. It seems like Jack Doohan is the man who's going to drive their Alpine alongside Pierre Gasly, which is... Look, happy for Doohan. I do think there are other drivers out there in Formula 2 that, impressed me more over the last couple of seasons. So, I think that he's a loyal option. He's, I guess, a relatively cheap option. That's probably why they're going to go for him. But is not, I don't think, going to set the grid alight if Doohan does get the drive in Formula 1 next season. Not wishing the best for him if he does. Speaking on the Mercedes side in terms of their potential rookie, Toto Wolff has definitely implied Kimi Antonelli's probably getting that drive. Sainz is now locked up. So the only other option for Mercedes is Verstappen, which still feels like an outside shot. And there's rumours that this contract is getting closer, maybe by Monza. So after the summer break, we have Zandvoort, and then it's Monza, then it's Baku, then it's Singapore. Those are the 4 races after the summer break before we do like summer break part 2. And then I think we go to Austin. So that's why there are rumours that Perez has effectively got 4 more races to prove himself, because this is the summer break now, but there's another stint of 4 races, then another big break, and of course 2 of those tracks, Baku and Singapore, are tracks where Perez has gone well historically. But rumour has it, Monza, they may confirm Antonelli to Mercedes. But, if I'm Mercedes, I'm still waiting as long as possible to see if Max wants to jump ship, because you never know the way this season is currently going. The issue is, maybe in part for Mercedes, that they very nearly secured a 1-2. They didn't. One of their drivers got disqualified, which shows that they're definitely not fully on top of their operations, Mercedes. And if you're seeing this in your Verstappen, you're thinking, well, our team don't make those mistakes at Red Bull, but Mercedes apparently do. So there was some speculation why Russell was underweight, what was going on, and there was some discussion on this by Mercedes, and they said that there were basically 3 factors in play. Clearly factors they should have dealt better with, but 3 factors in play. So the tyre wear was part of it, but not the only part of it, right? So Toby Gruner obviously quotes what is said here by Andrew Shovlin in their recap video. Both cars were within 500 grams after qualifying. George was the only one who had this problem because his tyre wear was much higher during the longer stints, and it looks like we lost more material on the plank. So that's very interesting. So last year, you guys might remember this actually, there was talk about the plank of Red Bull at Spa. The Red Bull was unreal at Spa last year, but it was the only car on the grid that was lifting going up Raidillon. The reason for this was because the team believed, Red Bull believed, if they went flat out up Raidillon, as you can well do, they would bash the floor into the ground too much, they would wear the floor too much, and therefore they would be outside of the limits in terms of floor wear, plank wear, basically, at the bottom of the car. But obviously, if you wear the plank, you also lose mass as well. So it seems like Russell didn't wear the plank enough to get disqualified for plank wear, but did wear it enough to lose enough weight that it contributed to the issue. Russell himself lost a lot of weight apparently during the Grand Prix as well, just, water weight and stuff like this. And Clearly, the tyres lost a lot of rubber because he was on the long stint, but clearly Mercedes should have known better at some point here than to allow this to actually occur, and there were just a few contributing factors that Mercedes messed up on that caused this to be the case. Now, there was some positive news though from Mercedes, where Andrew Chauvelin also goes on to say they removed their upgrade after Friday because effectively their car wasn't looking so good. They weren't really sure why, because they thought their upgrades were going to work. The Silverstone package though worked very well at Silverstone. They won it there, so they thought, you know what, Spa and Silverstone in many respects aren't too dissimilar. Let's run the same package again, which of course they did, and Chauvelin says they accidentally introduced some problems somewhere, but we think that's because of how we were running the car, not necessarily due to the upgrades, giving us bouncing, giving us issues with the balance. But he says Mercedes are confident that they will reintroduce those upgrades in Zandvoort, and they believe they will indeed work as intended. So that is, we talked about it the other day, but nonetheless Mercedes is still pretty gung-ho on the idea that yes, their upgrades did work, they will bring performance in Zandvoort, and sure, other teams are going to bring upgrades as well, but Red Bull aren't talking too much about upgrades right now, which might be a bit of a concern for them, but their championship lead is still fine. It's just, this is points scored over the last 7 rounds compared to the first 7 rounds. The first 7 rounds, there were 2 very different teams at the top of the standings to what we have now, right? Just kind of incredible to think about that Sauber, Williams, Alpine, Haas and RB have swapped around actually. Haas have done very well over the last few rounds, but basically everything else has been the same in terms of the pecking order between the first 7 and the last 7, but at the top of the field, it's swapped around dramatically. McLaren and Mercedes have moved up the order, both scoring significantly more points than Red Bull and Ferrari over the last 7 rounds, and as it stands, that looks set to continue, especially because of this man in the Red Bull car. Sergio Perez has been struggling hard, and I was pretty convinced they were going to get rid of him, and I think many people in the community were as well. But clearly, I underestimate the power of the pay driver, because, look, Perez in his very early days was considered a bit of a pay driver just because of his massive backing, and we'll discuss this in more detail in a second. That kind of went away as Perez proved himself to be a good caliber driver. And obviously he did a good job for Red Bull in 2021, but frankly they still lost the constructors because he wasn't as good as Bottas over the course of the season. But Perez is going to stay. This has been confirmed by the team. There's no doubt about it for now, because Horner said, we are looking forward to seeing him race on tracks that he's done well at in the past. And Marco then went on to say, well, things are still open to change in 2025, and you'd expect that they probably will be. So Red Bull have not said, oh, he's going to stay to the end of the year, but they have said he's staying. And that's basically all they've said, right? So it's like, he's staying for now? Is he staying for next year? Like, what's going on here? But clearly, Perez has not been performing well enough. Horner himself, who has good loyalty from Checo, seems to like him, seems to have wanted him to work. Horner's, let's say, tone of voice over the last couple of weeks changed quite quickly from, no, well, we're supporting Perez, we want him to get back to form, to very quickly saying, this is unacceptable. We can't have only one car getting the points. P2 to P8 is a disaster. And I thought Horner's tone was very indicative of a man who was about to get rid of Perez. Marco definitely getting rid of Perez. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that if Marco could snap his fingers and Perez would just disappear off the team and put Lawson in, or probably he would want Lawson in rather than Ricciardo, to be fair, Helmut Marco. Marco doesn't have all the cards though. He can't make all the decisions. And Christian Horner, who does have all the cards, we think, although potentially there are some shadow actors in the background making things rather interesting, I thought Horner had also convinced himself that it was time for Perez to go. Now, there are interesting rumours on basically Marco wanted him gone, Horner wanted him to stay. But did Horner really want him to stay? And this has been the big question of the last day or so as to whether there's a bit more to it. Because you look at this Red Bull team, it's the same guys in charge. Now, Dietrich Mateschitz has unfortunately passed away. Obviously, the talisman of the team in many respects, the OG founder. There's no way that Mateschitz, if he was still in charge, in my opinion, would look at the way the team currently is and say, oh, yeah, I don't mind giving up the Constructors' title. We want the money for keeping Perez, or whatever, that we'll discuss in a second. If Mateschitz was still alive, I think Perez was gone quite a while ago, to be honest. I do think that organisation internally has changed somewhat, and let's be real, I mean, there's been so many drivers over the last few years that have done, frankly, better jobs than Perez, but yet they lost their seat and Perez gets to keep it. So Marco was very clear. The cards will be shuffled again for 2025 and might be shuffled again sooner than that, because does Perez still make it to the end of the season? I still kind of doubt it, just because, as I say, we've got the 4 next races where Perez has historically done okay. You know, Baku's a great track for him. Singapore, he's done well there as well. So if he doesn't deliver there, I think it's definitely chalked for his time at Red Bull, you would think. But maybe somebody might come into play. And this is why the rumour is about exactly what changed for Perez to stay, because everyone seemed relatively convinced that Perez was for sure going to go. That seemed to be the direction from Red Bull. The rumour had it that, yep, Ricciardo was going to get the seat, and all of a sudden, that was no longer the case. So this is the article here in the original German. Let me just hit the translate. On F1 Insider by Ralph Bach, and look, F1 Insider, you've always got to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, but I will say, Motorsport Italy today, Italian press, but nonetheless, the Motorsport official journalism magazine, they echoed a similar sentiment that we'll discuss in a second. But apparently, the Verstappen family was told, basically, Perez is gone. Verstappen will have a new teammate at the first race after the summer break at the home race in Zandvoort, and this message was apparently quite clear. I also wonder, does this on any level further harm the relationship between Max and Red Bull? Even if Max wants Perez to stay, which by his public words it kind of seems like he does, or at least he doesn't really care. If you're telling the Verstappen family and Verstappen, hey, yeah, Perez is gone, Max is going to get Ricciardo or whatever it is, teammates, and then that doesn't happen, does that not, to some degree, affect the trust that you're going to have in this organisation? I don't know, it probably would to me. So Perez is now staying after all, but precisely why? Because this has been described as a 180-degree turnaround. The Red Bull decision makers were apparently convinced that Perez was going to go. It was all expected that Perez was going to get fired and probably would be out of the sport at this point, right? Maybe a team like Alpine or Audi come along and snap him up, but excluding that, that might be him done, because he's not going to RB. They're going to put Lawson in the car. They're probably going to put Ricciardo up to the Red Bull Racing seat. But this is the rumour, that Marco was a thorn in Ricciardo's side because of the Australian's age, etc., etc. But apparently, this is what happens. This is what leaked out behind the scenes. Formula One rights holder Liberty Media, as in the literal owners of the sport, asked Red Bull to reconsider the Perez dismissal. They feared a huge drop in revenue at the Mexican Grand Prix on October 27th without national hero Perez. And then Marco hinted the following. So, I think they go on to say a little bit more about this as well, but how about this as a rumour, right? That the literal owners of the sport are coming up to one of the teams and saying, hey, we would prefer you prioritise the entertainment value of the sport over your own competitiveness. And they're going to listen to the owners of the sport because there is vested interest to do precisely that. If this is remarkable if it's true, it really raises serious questions on whether we are actually watching a sport or whether we are merely watching an entertainment product masquerading as a sport. Because if the owners are going to come involved and say, yeah, well, actually, Perez staying is good for us, it means that Max has no battling from his own team, which was bad a little while ago, but it does now mean that Max has no support in his fight against the other teams. It means the championships are more competitive with Perez being bad. That's probably good for Liberty as well. And Perez is a huge draw in Mexico, in the Hispanic community, most certainly in America, right? In the USA. That's going to be a big deal in Austin. That's going to be a big deal in Mexico. And I'm sure probably the Mexican Grand Prix is already sold out. But with Perez there, that's a big deal. The other big rumour as well was that there's a Netflix documentary coming out on Perez in the next few days, I'm pretty sure. And I imagine that Netflix or whoever were not necessarily of the mind to have Perez be dropped from his team right on cue with that coming out. So Perez has massive backing. I don't think it should be underestimated quite the amount of money and the amount of resource and the amount of power that is held by those that are backing Sergio Perez behind the scenes. And I don't think this is just the Liberty Media angle. there's more to it as well. And actually, this was even rumoured yesterday, and Motorsport Italy straight up come out and say it. So the very logical plans fell apart on Monday afternoon when the Red Bull top brass, somewhat surprisingly, decided to continue to trust the Mexican driver, while Checo's exit from the world champion team was taken for granted after his bad result in Belgium, finishing 7th. 8th, but 7th after the DNQ for Russell after starting from the front row. With the temporary confirmation of Perez, it seems dictated not so much by motivational or sporting choices, but by purely economic reasons. Carlos Slim. So Carlos Slim is, I think, like the 10th richest man on the planet. Obviously difficult to say, but at least at some point he was unbelievably wealthy. And of course he still is, right? He's right up there near the top of the billionaires list. Anyway, he has backed Perez for a long time, and who I believe also made a big investment recently into F1 TV, who are like owned by Liberty Media as well. So you gotta wonder how much money is passed around behind the scenes, because Carlos Slim, who has been, sponsor of the Mexican driver, financier, of course, of Perez as well, has not exactly a controlling stake, but some degree of controlling interest in Liberty Media and Formula One on some extent. So the theory goes that Slim effectively intervenes to say, no, Perez is not getting fired, which is mad. Is it not crazy that Slim can effectively go along and say, hey, Liberty Media, owners of Formula One, I want Perez to stay. What have I got to do to make that happen? Maybe I'll invest here. Maybe I'll retract my investment if you guys don't convince Red Bull to keep him. Or maybe he goes to Red Bull and says, hey, I can give you guys more money to, with the support of Perez, whatever. It's economic reasons why Perez is staying, and it's fascinating if this is true, but it just goes to show that this sport is often not what it seems, and some of these decisions that may or may not be made are not necessarily made with the best interest of the sport and, frankly, the competitiveness of the teams in mind. So if Red Bull lose the Constructors' title this year, and they may lose it anyway, regardless of who they put in that car at this point, but if they do, there will be fingers pointed potentially at the end of the season. Of course, as I say, if the season started in Montreal, or at least as Russell says, the championship standings will be looking very, very different indeed. There was even this, just quickly on Adrian Newey, because one of the still recurring themes in the background right now in F1 is, where's Newey actually going to go? Aston, McLaren, obviously Ferrari. Eddie Jordan, his manager, said Red Bull should go and get him back, but basically it's way too late for that. So pretty funny that Eddie Jordan still kind of almost potentially enticing offers on some level, maybe implying that the deal isn't necessarily done wherever he's going to go. But just to close out the video, I thought this was kind of interesting. A prediction of the championship standings at the end of the season. So a supercomputer prediction. I find it funny when they say supercomputer, because like any computer nowadays, even like your phone or like an old phone, can run these type of calculations if you give it the right algorithm. But no, it takes a supercomputer to crunch all the numbers. But whatever, they've put some data in to try and figure out what might happen, and the computer says Verstappen wins the title. Wow, shocker, right? Congratulations. I guess what's more interesting is who wins the Constructors. They also put that out, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, here we go. So the supercomputer predicts that McLaren are going to win the Constructors Championship, and Mercedes aren't going to be that far behind either. The gap is said to be pretty close, but look, we'll see whether this comes true or not. I mean, Haas getting 78 points feels like a tall order, but who knows at this point. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.